family originate from this part, from like Lithuania, Russia. So this is a part of the world that I know I have heritage from, but I don't know it. So it's like discovering something that's familiar, and a world that I might have grown up in had they stayed here.
When did they leave?
Oh, turn of the century, yeah, 1900s.
You traveled also before starting to sing. What were you looking for?
People. Gosh, I don't think about that so much. I think that when I did lots of traveling before music, it was to find people who had relationships, deep relationships with nature. And their environment and their land. So a lot of anthropological, ethnobotanical journeys to try and meet people who had a strong relationship to the land. It was personal interest, but it was about learning as much about the land and the environment as about the communities that existed in close proximity that still practiced a traditional subsistence. And learning about different ways of perception, and it was, it was wandering. I was wandering. I didn't always know what I was looking for, but I was trying to, find communities that had deep roots, essentially. And I didn't know that was going to turn into the root being musical root, and I don't see that musical root now as being any different to any of the other roots, but. Certainly I was just wanting to know about indigenous ancient culture that still existed, of what that meant in a contemporary environment. That my area of interest, or where there was a people that was still practicing the old ways, was amongst the English gypsies and the Scottish and Irish travellers, who are both the kind of ancient, indigenous, in many ways, people who've kept the old ways, and are nomadic as well. So they were a transient, itinerant people who still lived very close to the land and kept up a lot of the oral culture, and still to this day have the remains of that ancient world in their community. The influences of where contemporary modern culture came in and got rid of the old songs, didn't have an impact until the 1970s, where in the 1930s and 40s, 20s, 30s and 40s, popular culture was pushing out from the social gatherings the old songs. The gypsies, the gypsy travellers, because they lived peripheral and they lived around fire and outdoors, they didn't have electricity. They lived a very kind of hard and traditional subsistence. They didn't have the opportunity to have radios and televisions until much later on. And so the context of where the sharing of oral culture existed continued right until, late into the 20th century. And in fact, they say that they can date when the oral culture died in the UK, and it was in 1974 in the summer, when the big shopping centre called Woolworths, which no longer exists in England, but it's like a common chain that sold everything for the household, they started selling portable televisions that just had an aerial, and every traveller then bought a television and brought it into the caravan. And once they had come into the caravan, they said everybody stopped listening to the old people. And that was the fire break. After that, nobody listened. So anybody who was old enough before 1974 to have heard and sat round, spent nights and nights listening to the old people, would have had the music and the culture inside them. And after that, they just watched TV. So that was the sort of the deadline. And I'm not an expert, but the new travellers, they were the new age travellers, the new travellers as they're called, who've taken up a way of life that's very similar, but didn't, no interaction. The old gypsies really hated the hippie travellers. And although I have a lot of respect for both of them, the New Travellers didn't keep the practices of singing, of that repertoire of songs. There was music, and there was punk music. There was a bit of folk music as well, but it was very, it was haphazard. It wasn't a very pure, ancient, direct route music. There were things that were continued, particularly plant medicine and some of the old practices that the New Travellers have kept going, and also kind of shared backwards and forwards, and but the songs and the storytelling really was very much of the Old Travellers. Right, there's so many great examples of like Madness and UB40, the two lead singers, both their fathers were folk singers and music hall singers, and as young lads they used to accompany their parents, their fathers, to go and listen to folk songs. David Bowie's father was a music hall performer, so was very versed in that old world of kind of entertainment that was folkish, from a kind of other time. And I think, I think there is, one can say there's like a homeopathic trace within a lot of this music. Like ABBA, they're expert folk musicians. They knew all about the Scandinavian folk themes and were, borrowing ideas, informed. But Britain is, was really kind of determined to kind of create new sounds, and I think trying to pick out a folk melody in Ultravox or New Order is a sort of you have to be a real music specialist to be able to do that. And I'm sure there are little kind of traces, but I think it is in there, and it's always amazing how today you find so many of those people who were in those bands and being, really modern. Like, the great example is Elizabeth Fraser, who's from Cocteau Twins and Massive Attack. She's just recorded on my album that is coming out next year, and she's devoted folk singer. I mean, that's all she wants to sing now, and she grew up with it, and she loves it, and that's all she'll sing now, is folk songs. And it's incredible that here's one of the most modern and fabulous voices of a real edgy 80s music is testifies that is her great influence. My teacher, who was a Scottish traveller, whose ring I wear, and this is, as he calls it, the ballad ring, and this ring is the responsibility to look after, to be the caretaker. And he always says, you have the keys to the museum. You don't own the collection, you just have the keys. And your job is to let as many people in there and see the collection as possible. But all you're doing is keeping them alive, watering them. You know what I mean? I think we have to remember that folk songs in Britain are unaccompanied. They are single melody, single voice, no accompaniment. There's never really been any examples in the tradition, pre-revival, of harmony singing apart from one family or accompaniment. It was always the tunes were played and then the song would exist, totally solo. So anything that happens, you put a guitar, you just put a little violin, whatever it is, you're already making it up. This is already a modern interpretation. So yeah, we have this feeling that, well, all folk music used to sound like, Martin Carthy, John Renbourn, Bert Jansch with some guitar and some Dave Swarbrick, and that's the sound. But actually that was a completely modern idea of way of re-representing. So for me, it's like, well, why? I don't have to do it like that. If you're going to break the rule, use anything you like. So I did make a kind of conscious decision that I didn't want to work with guitars, but I also wanted to explore not so much the multiculturalism of Britain, though I, as somebody who grew up in London as a son of migrant families in a melting pot, British identity was a very complex and like, you know, extraordinary, you know, anathema, you know, it was many things. But I also was aware that the music, I was sort of getting, as I was on my journey for learning the songs and understanding what their role was in contemporary UK, particularly London, there was a very big movement at the time about folk against fascism. There was a really, it was the first beginnings of the awakening of far right propaganda and groups in the UK. I mean, they'd never really gone away, but suddenly they became present and they started to say, folk music is our pure music of this country, and it's the music of the far right, of the nationalist movement, as has been the case in many other places. And there was a very clear, determined act upon the folk music community, the revival community, to say, no, this is not the case. The music is highly multicultural, and it's both multicultural in today's world because we have so many different diverse communities involved in contributing to the music, though I would say that there's never enough diversity in it, but also that historically the music actually is as much a mongrel of our language, and the balladic influences have come from Scandinavia, they come from France and Germany, through mythology, through epic tale. They've come through the gypsies, who've brought huge amounts of musical influence over from the East and from India. And you know, our folk music is, there's no pedigree. It's a, you know, it's a hodgepodge of so many different cultures. So to say it's in any way pure is completely inaccurate. So it's like, well, let's celebrate that. Let's let those ancestral voices within the music be given a voice, maybe. So that's always been, it's not been a conscious decision in my choices, like, oh, I want some this and I want, it's whatever of those sound worlds that I'm experiencing by living in London and travelling, that I'm thinking that is the right sound world. It's a curator. I am a curator of the songs in that sense. I've set up an organisation called the Song Collectors Collective, which is an organisation that's there to continue the collecting of oral culture, which song, story, mythology, folklore, plant lore, all those, you know, yarns, all the sort of intangible cultural heritages of the UK. And unfortunately, a lot of the institutions that exist around the preservation of the culture aren't interested in the conservation of the culture. They're interested in the archival, you know, protection and classification. And I arrived as a young man, fascinated, wanting to learn and reading the books, but kind of wondering why there wasn't, you know, what was the living roots? Where did it exist in the field, amongst the communities? And all the people who were song collecting through from, you know, the 1880s through to the 1980s, there was this kind of 100-year plus window of, it stopped in the 1970s, 80s. People just sort of, all the song collectors stopped collecting as though everything had been recorded, or not, or they just gave up because there was no support, there was no, you know, institutional maintaining of that oral collecting. So I, as a young kind of kid, went out and realised there's so much out there that needs to be documented, and it's disappearing. And we have now 5 to 10 years left where all the old singers will pass on without question. It'll be gone in 10 years. So I'm now running training programs and have been fundraising, building projects online and in the field to get people out collecting, and we've had some extraordinary projects and recorded thousands of songs and hundreds of people and hundreds of thousands of hours and video of some of the last of the old singers. You know, I'd love to see there be more of an effort and more of a governmental and institutional support for this work and other people doing it, but there just doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be an interest that people are going, holy shit, there is this stuff, there is these people with this gold, these treasures living on our doorsteps who are ignored and forgotten about. And why are we not listening to the old people? You know, everyone wants fast, quick, they want it learn it from YouTube. They're not interested in putting that slow time to sitting with an old person who's, you know, digging deep to 80 years of memory, and memory that they've inherited from somebody who was 80 years old when they were a child. You know, the work is magical in the true sense of the word. And what I'm interested in is sort of creating a structure that's both about an official, you know, good for library and archival purpose documentation, but also just an agency for brokering relationships that us young people can have with our elders, and a passing on, which we are so much poorer for not having. So that's kind of what I'm working on an intuitive level, but also on a kind of technical level. But it has to be done technically, because there's no good me going and hanging out with these incredible people and me benefiting from all this wealth of knowledge and not having it available for that family to listen to their elders in years to come, and for that community to have access to their own culture, as well as other singers and folklorists and academics and researchers to be able to benefit from these voices. It's the big debate. What is world music? It's the question we must never ask, really. I think of what I'm interested in is this idea that I am celebrating ancient music from my land that is contiguous and as vital and serves the same role as music from any other indigenous tribal community. And I am trying to nurture it and propagate it in a sensitive and also as successful a way as possible. So there's that duty that I think all cultures have, that where the world music label kind of sits under, of artists that are both from that community or from near that community, or have connected with their community, and are trying to usher it into today and for tomorrow, to make it relevant and make it attractive and actually celebrate the messages that are within it.
About your singing style, is it traditional style or your singing technique, or is it yours? Did you find it by yourself?
Yeah. Fuck knows. Everybody will say, it's not for me to say, and it's not for anybody to say. I sing the way I sing, and it serves the work that I do in the best way that I can. It has as much of the muscular ingredients comes from listening to an old traveller, a horse dealer with raw voice, weary from smoke and hard life, as it has from listening to Mariah Carey or Michael Jackson. You know, it's like I can't tell you where my voice has come from. As much of my learning to sing has come from losing affectation, about trying to sing in a way that is as close to a connection with the song, and not getting in the way of the song as well as serving the song. So I sometimes think I sound too much like this, or I have a bit of this and a bit of that, and you can kind of dissect a voice, anyone's voice, to see what their influences are. And a bit of me feels that the less attention paid on that, the more we get into the heart of what's being sung, and not pay attention on the singer in that sense. Yeah. You know, every song is different. Where I've learnt the song from changes. If I've learnt a song from my teacher, Stanley Robertson, the Scottish traveller, the melody line will have within it a sort of it's like I talk about the roots, like, you know, the soil in which it's grown, the minerals of which it's been grown from that land. The reasons for it turning out like that are, you can't remove them. They're always going to be there. Even if you cut the sapling and, you know, you replant it, still the DNA of that song is still inherently part of that community. So there are things that I will do within that song which I can trace back to that singer and that place, and thus that landscape as well. And then there are songs that I have learnt from someone else, somewhere else, and I've really had to bring a different approach, or maybe the way I've work it with instrumentation means that I bring in an influence that I've learnt from another singer, from a different song, a decoration, because I feel that's an ornamentation that I feel serves that moment of the song. But so much of that is unconscious, and that's it. I don't, you know, there isn't such an intentional, you know, I'm going to use that paintbrush and I'm going to use that oil and mix it here. It really is like it's more of a divining of what is the right thing to use. And, you know, sometimes my style gets narrower and narrower as I focus in on what sort of a singer I am. And sometimes I feel I should try and be more like this and try and do more of this, and that people want to hear more of these sorts of songs. And in the end, for me, the one thing I try and always do more and more of, and will do more of as I get older, is slow down. The longer I can take on a song and the more silence in the song, the better. Because I think always silence is the greatest part of the melody. And in some ways with these songs, all they are is a decoration of the silence, and that's one of the great learnings of these songs, and where you can hear deepest into the song, it's in those moments of silence.